Hello everyone, welcome back to an episode of Incorrect Politics. Today we are going to discuss the 2024 presidential election, and the topic today will be focusing on how the change the tide would be from 2016 to 2020 and further to 2024. And today we are going to use 270towin.com, and we are using the estimated pending results of 2020 census. So this map itself is not final, it could still change. But right now, that is how it is most likely going to be based on the census and the consensus by the American people and the experts. So first of all, let's start with categorize all the safe states that for the Democrats. And those states will include the state of California, Oregon, Washington, the state of Illinois, the state of New York, the state of Vermont, the state of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, District of Columbia, and also the state of Maine's 1st Congressional District, and state of Hawaii. That will pretty much be all the safe states for the Democrats. And now let's categorize the safe states for Republicans. And those states include the state of Idaho, the state of Utah, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska's state at large, the Nebraska's 1st Congressional District and the 3rd Congressional District, Kansas, Oklahoma, the state of Arkansas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Kentucky, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, state of Indiana, West Virginia, and that will pretty much be all of the safe states by the Republicans. And that's basically the starting point, and this map itself, it tells you something. Isn't it interesting? So if we take a look at maybe just 2 cycles ago in 2012 or 2016, back in 2012, a lot of the states wouldn't be rated this way. For example, right now we're not categorized Texas as a safe Republican state, but back in 2012 it would have been a safe state. Back in 2012, Mitt Romney won Georgia with double digits, and even in 2016, Donald Trump carried the state by around 5 to 6 points. It was a safe state for Republican alongside with all the southern states, but it isn't. And the reason why it's because these states are part of the southern states where immigrations are flocking in, and the demographics are changing, so it are favoring the Democrats much more. And the similar stuff will apply to the states that we are going to discuss later, including some leaning and likely Democrat states, in which we are going to categorize them now. So now let's take a look at the likely Democratic states, and those states include the state of Colorado and the state of New Mexico. So these 2 states share a trait in common. They are getting increasingly more minority voters over there, and the demographics are coming more and more friendly to the Democrats. And I believe that Texas, Georgia, Arizona, they both share a similar trend inside. They are both trending leftward and more democratic. And the reason why right now Georgia, Texas is about at the swing state status is because their starting point is much more Republican, while New Mexico and Colorado, they have been about neck to neck when George Bush won his re-election in 2004. Even New Mexico, it is already away from Republicans back in 2004 and even 2000 when Bush won his first election. So you can't really say that these states, they are actually moving in a similar direction. It's just they started differently. But in the future, they are likely going to correlate in each other in terms of the electoral preference. So there are one more likely state, and that state will be the state of Virginia. Back in few election cycles, precisely 2004 ago, Virginia was supposed to be a at least remotely competitive state for the Republican Party, but ever since then, Virginia has been trending away from the Republican Party, and that's also something warning signs for Republicans. However, a lot of the electorate inside the Republican voters are pretty contradictory. For example, you might have noticed that Donald Trump won a lot of support in the so-called Rust Belt state, which is Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Minnesota, and these regions. But these regions are home to blue-collar workers who were greatly influenced by the loss of big manufacturer jobs, and they are not so college educated in comparison to states like Virginia. In fact, in Virginia, northern part of it, which borders with Maryland, District of Columbia is right here. So a great portion of Virginia is actually constitutes of a lot of so-called elite voters, which is more likely going to be a liberal leaned, even though they sometimes occasionally leans to independent Republicans when a candidate like Mitt Romney or maybe those past New England governors of Republicans, maybe like Chris Christie, Chris Sununu, or maybe Phil Scott, maybe these kind of Republicans ran for election, then Virginia may swing a little bit towards the central. But in the near future, Virginia with a generic Republican versus a generic Democrat scenario, it is very, very unlikely going to return to at least to a point where it is remotely competitive for the Republicans. So right now, let us start into taking a look at the likely column for the Republican Party. And the likely part of the Republican Party includes the state of Ohio, the state of Iowa, and the state of... Sorry, I forgot that I did not categorize Missouri itself as a safe Republican state. It is supposed to be a safe Republican state. And the state of Alaska is also going to be a likely. State of Montana will also be a likely Republican state. And these four states of likely states, they are not trending in similar direction. In fact, we must consider it in a distinct manner. So for the groups, Iowa and Ohio, they are moving in the same direction. They are moving rightward. A few days ago, I saw on the Let's Talk Election channel saying that Iowa and Ohio is a place where Donald Trump's support were overestimated. Correct me if I'm wrong, but these places are not. If we take a look at the state of Iowa's map and state of Ohio's map, we'll immediately see that the so-called Donald Trump exclusive effect of Iowa and Ohio is non-existent. So if we can see that Iowa itself is trending more Republicans in most part of the state, even the urban areas where Dallas County is, and those places, they are trending about leftward, but they are no match of other urban places inside the United States. And a similar thing applies to Ohio. In fact, you cannot just deny the fact that Ohio and Iowa, they are gradually losing populations. And the so-called gradually losing populations are actually bringing down the portion of their blue dots. For example, in this Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, these places where there are heavy Democratic presence, they are losing populations, and these places losing populations, they naturally leads to more white voter, more not college educated voters, and the presence of these voter blocks is going to boost Republican hopes in these states. And if you take a look at the electoral votes, Iowa is still at 6 electoral votes, but Ohio is down from 18 to 17. And I can guarantee you can consider it this way. Before the 2016 election, the Ohio's 18 electoral votes, it's about like 10 of the representatives is like Republicans and 8 of them are Democrats. And the losing electoral vote is basically that Democrat from the 8 Democrats. So it's basically 10 to 7 inside Ohio. So by the time the trend goes, Ohio is going to swing rightward and rightward unless something special happens. And for the opposite direction, the state of Alaska itself is actually trending a little bit leftward in comparison to 2016 and 2012. I don't have a very clear presence of why exactly Alaska is trending leftward, but I'm going to cover that in a future video once I made out my research. But the only thing is certain, Alaska went from safe Republican state back to likely Republican state, but that's the opposite direction of Ohio and Iowa. So in the near future, I believe that we need to take a very close observation of 2024 election. If Alaska went into about like 5 to 8 points to the Republican Party, then that basically means that Alaska itself is trending towards the neutral line. But I don't believe the case will apply to Ohio and Iowa. I believe they will only go more rightward. The state of Montana itself, it is not so safe on the state level. For example, just a few moments ago, they have a Democratic governor, and they also have John Tester, a senator of Democrats. So Montana itself, while it tends to vote Republican by around 10 to 15 points, it does not completely eradicate the chance for a Democratic victory here. And owing to that, Montana is quite inelastic in its composition, and it usually sticks around a little bit more than double digits for Republican victory over here. So it is more like a non-mover. Montana doesn't become increasingly more leftward or rightward in terms of the electoral presence. It just stays in the likely column and the edge of the safe column. So there really isn't that much to indicate in the state of Montana. So right now, let us start to categorize the lean Democratic states, in which you will see more interesting facts here. So the lean Democratic states will include the state of Minnesota. Yes, a lot of people are arguing about whether Minnesota itself is a state that is trending leftward or rightward. Well, some people say that starting from 1984, where Walter Mondale carried Minnesota, and that's basically the only state he carried back to that landslide defeat to Reagan. However, ever since then, Minnesota has been trending more and more rightward. So from about 20 points victory for Clinton in 1992 to Hillary Clinton, or coincidentally another Clinton, in 2016, that's only a 1.5 point victory in Minnesota for Hillary Clinton. However, the trend has reversed in 2020 election, where Joe Biden, he won the state of Minnesota by a little bit over 6 to 7 points. So that is something. 6 to 7 point victory, it is certainly overturnable. However, right now, Minnesota is not at a stage where it is a tilt state. A tilt state, it's you will feel like with a correct candidate. For example, if this state is naturally a liberal-leaning state, then a liberal Republican candidate will flip the Democratic status immediately to a Republican status. However, Minnesota, although it has a trait of a manufacturing status, it has a lot of farmer worker coalition inside the northern part of the Minnesota, and a lot of the well-educated people in Minneapolis. Even though with people with highly educated trade or people with a farmer status came out from a Republican nominee, I still cannot ensure that Minnesota is likely going to flip. That is the reason why I currently place Minnesota as a lean Democratic column instead of a tilt one. In fact, we basically must consider Minnesota itself as two parts of the state, and these two parts are contradicting each other. In the northern part, where farmers and the traditional industries are surging, these places are more like the rest parts of the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania part, and these places are traditionally actually Democratic strongholds. These are the areas in these parts, excluding the more eastern parts. These places are traditionally Democratic strongholds, but they have been stronging more and more Republicans ever since the Democratic Party seems to sway away from them, the blue-collar workers. However, in comparisons, these places where it's normally a Republican stronghold stays around the same in Minnesota, but the urban area is the only place where Democratic are not losing ground. In fact, Minneapolis itself, it increased both in depth and in strength. In fact, you can say that the Democratic blue dot is expanding in terms of its size and in terms of its how deep blue it is. So Minnesota as a whole has to be viewed as two parts of the state, and which part emerge as a victor will determine whether the 9 electoral votes of Minnesota will eventually end up with. There is one more state that is supposed to be categorized as a lean Democratic state. Actually, 2 states. So now let's categorize them. The first state will be the state of Maine at large. Maine at large itself is leaning towards the Democrat, that is lesser doubt, but the other state would be the state of New Hampshire. In 2016, Donald Trump came close in winning 3 of these leaning states. Minnesota, Donald Trump lost by a half point, and New Hampshire, Donald Trump lost by about 2 points. In the state of Maine, Donald Trump also loses the state of Maine with less than 5 points, outperforming a lot of candidates, even better than McCain, than Romney, the liberal candidate coming from the New England region. So people are saying that maybe these states are not so-called the elite or leaning towards the liberal policies because of people like Donald Trump could win in these regions. But in 2020, we see all these so-called expectations defied and reversed. Now, Maine is around 8 to 10 point defeat for Trump, and New Hampshire is around more or less the same, and Minnesota is about 7 point victory for Biden. So these places are not really shifting in terms of leftward or rightward, and it is somewhat hard to determine whether these places are actually moving a long-term trend, because yes, in 2016, in fact, no one would have expected that Trump would have won in these areas, but in 2020, the trend seems much more reasonable, at least for the experts and the pundits. So these places, right now, I can only say that these places are not moving in a clear direction. Hence, we shouldn't be putting them as a tilt column, because it is certainly not to the point, as I've mentioned in the state of Minnesota, it's not to a point where with a right candidate, Republican is very likely to win more than not. So now let's move into the lean Republican column. And for the lean Republican column, I'm going to say there is only one state that fit this definition, and that is the state of Florida. Yes, people say that the state of Florida is Trump exclusive to be so big of a margin in a victor, but I don't believe so. If you take a look at all elections starting from 2008, where McCain lost in a humiliating landslide in Florida, to 2012, where Obama barely clings on to the Florida's electoral vote, to 2016 to 2020, you can see that Republican vote share has been steadily increased regardless of the national environment of the general election. So that is something. Florida itself has conservatives' natural home base. Its conservative base is much larger than the conservative base in places like, say, California. So Florida itself also has a lot of immigrants coming from the communist countries, and these people, they are naturally born with a hatred to the left-leaning policies, and it is very, very hard to convince them that Democrats is not a speaker of the left-wing communist policy after this 2020 election, and a recent development from 18 where the four squads like AOC and other left-wing politicians enter the politics and gain the spotlight and contractions of the Democratic leadership. So it is becoming increasingly difficult for Democrat as a whole, not just Donald Trump surging in Florida, but Democrat as a whole to win in the state of Florida, and that is something. So now let's move into the remaining part of the state. I will not leave any toss-up stage for today, so I will try to categorize each of them with a preference, but I must tell you that in the tilt column, it represents around 3 to 5 point margin or even less of the final result in 2024, and such small margin can easily be swayed by the difference of a candidate. For example, let's start with the Rust Belt state. If a Mitt Romney type of guy or a liberal Republican decide to run inside the 2024 election, then I can basically guarantee you that Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania is going to go to Democrats. However, if Republican embraces Trump's populism and find a similar candidate, or maybe like Mike Pompeo, maybe like Ron DeSantis, then I can assure you that these Rust Belt states will at least remain in the column of a Republican Party. So right now, let's start from the state of Texas. So right now, I believe that Texas, in this presence, or even in 2022 midterm elections, Texas is going to be a lean R, at least in 2022, because it's supposed to be a red wave year. That's traditional against a president's first term. However, I certainly believe that Texas is shifting away from the Republicans' grasp, and the speed of its shifting is around 4 to 5 points per election cycle. Donald Trump carried Texas by only about 6 points, so by the time of 2024, even though I believe that Donald Trump will barely hang on to Texas, it's going to become a tilt margin. Like the 2024 general Republican is going to carry Texas by around 2 to 3 points, and that is not subject to any types of candidate personality, because if you nominate a liberal Republican in the state of Texas, then you are going to lose support newly gained by Donald Trump in the western part of the Texas, where a lot of people were very worried about immigrations and illegal aliens. However, if you nominate a populist type of Republicans, then you are going to lose even more voters from the suburbs of Texas and the places near like Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth. So it is a no-no for Republicans. They are just going to lose more support unless Democrats did something especially wrong, like maybe nominating someone too liberal for Texas. right now the Democrats seems to have a misconception, seeing that they could have put on Beto O'Rourke in 2018 and he barely lost to Ted Cruz. So they believe that they can try to put in a much more liberal-leaning candidate, and the support from urban areas like Austin or Dallas alone is going to support the victor of that candidate. However, that is not the case. Right now, Joe Biden is the reason why Texas shifted 5 points towards the center. If today another candidate is nominated, maybe Kamala Harris is nominated, maybe Bernie Sanders is nominated, then I can guarantee you Texas would not have continued its 5-point shifts to the left. It's going to be like 8 or 9 points to Trump, but it's not going to be that dramatic a shift. And the same thing applies to 2022, because it's not an election year. A down ballot year, Republican tends to do much better. So Texas is going to be a lean in 2022, as I previously stated, but it will not be in 2024 if Joe Biden decides to run for re-election, in which I believe he will, because President not running for a second term is a very rare occasion, and Joe Biden, despite having criticism of his mental health problem, has not done something really that putting in immediately unqualified for running. People would speculate, yes, it may cost him 1 or 2% in the general election, but that's not going to kill his complete desire to run for 2024. And now let's move to the other state, the state of Georgia. I do believe that this one is gone for Republican as for now. Georgia, like Texas, like Arizona, like New Mexico, like Colorado, these states supposed to be looked together. They are both shifting around 5 to 6 points leftward per election cycle, and that trend is not reversed unless so far we don't see any kind of sign saying that they are reversing. So there is no point to assume that Georgia is already crossing over the line to the Democrats. There is no way that Republican can gain Georgia back in 2024, especially if they nominate a moderate to maybe not conservative. There seems to be no more conservative Democrats, but if they nominate about moderate Democrat, then I believe that Georgia is going to become a stronghold for Democrats, at least in 2024. Wait, maybe not a stronghold, but just take a look in a other part of the state where there's like Texas. Texas is a 6-point victory for Democrats, and their blue dots look relatively much smaller in comparison to the entire area of the state. And just look at how big Atlanta is. This entire place looks like a blue little pile of water spreading out, and that's a lot of votes out there. You may say that it doesn't look like a lot, there's a lot of red up there, but just take a look at this little map, you'll see. Each district represents roughly same amount of population. This one little small bracket is same as this large little this large red bracket. They represent similar population. So just take a look at how many brackets are inside this. Each of them represents a 92 points margin for Biden, 86 point margin for Biden, whereas Republicans tends in these suburbs are around 40 points for 50 points, only in very little areas where they run the margins up to 70 to 80 points. So Georgia itself is trending leftward. Similar things happens in Arizona. In fact, Arizona is more special because in the Conecuh County and some the Grand Forks counties, those places, they are already naturally Democrat, even though they are not even urban areas. So Arizona's starting point is actually a little bit more leftward than Georgia. It's just that Arizona actually didn't shift that leftward this election cycle, but it was enough to give Joe Biden 11 electoral votes inside. And similarly, you can take a look at Phoenix. This is so small bracket, but this small one is same as the so big bracket over here inside the state of Utah. Well, actually, that's not state of Utah. That's also part of state of Arizona. This entire big one is same as a little chunk inside Phoenix. Isn't that something? So right now, Arizona and Georgia, I'm going to put them inside the tilt Democratic column. And for now, I believe that the state of Nevada, it's going to be, well, define your comparisons and your belief, it's going to be a tilt Republican state. The reason why is because if we take a look at Nevada's electoral presence, Nevada itself actually doesn't have that much urban area, and the votes there is actually quite static. If you take a look at 2016's election result comparison to 2020, Hillary Clinton won Nevada by roughly 2.5 points, and Joe Biden actually won lesser than Hillary Clinton by around, well, similarly 2.5 points, but a lesser inside the little digits. So the case in Nevada is that Nevada's Reno, this urban area, this small part of the state, is combating the entire Republican state, the entire Republican rural areas. And while Nevada's urban areas also becoming more and more democratic, it is shifting leftward, I must say, but the shifting speed of Reno is not as fast as the rest of the urban areas in states like California, Sacramento, Santa Rosa, or maybe like Georgia's Atlanta. It is shifting at a decelerated speed, to be honest with you. So in the near future, the rural area, while they maintain their about static speed shifting to the right side of the spectrum, the Reno part is not shifting quite as fast. So overall, it's going to balance Nevada into a Republican state. But I do believe that shift is going to occur in 2024 election. That will be enough time for the Republicans to gain the Nevada. 2022, I believe it's a toss-up. I actually believe that Republicans is going to win the majority of the 4 seats of Nevada's congressional district. Well, maybe not majority, but certainly I do believe that Republican is going to hold on to at least 2 House seats inside the state of Nevada. So now we move on to the state of North Carolina. State of North Carolina is going to be a tilt Republican. If you try to look into North Carolina's shift, it's actually moving leftward. But North Carolina itself is a very slow shifting state. It doesn't move a lot. The speed of its shifting is like around 1 point to the left every election cycle. So Donald Trump carried the state by around 2 points in 2016, and he carried the state by around 1.5 points. So there's no way that North Carolina is going to bump so fast into the leftward direction unless some special happened inside the candidacy of either Republicans or Democrats. So North Carolina, although influenced by Virginia, has a leftward shift. I do believe that in 2024 it's going to remain in the Republican column. So right now we have 3 more states where I believe that it's a pure toss-up. So before we deal with them, let us deal with the 2 districts inside Maine and Nebraska. In Maine's 2nd congressional district, I do believe that it is currently a tilt status for Republicans because Donald Trump has a tremendous effect inside this district. Without Donald Trump, it's not going to be that easy for a Republican to carry this part, because this part is basically, if you actually look at the map, the Maine 2nd congressional district is this part. This entire right upward part is red. The entire big part of them are rural areas, and they are all the 2nd district's composition. So it's the so-called rural area of the region. So that part is especially favorable to the electorate of Donald Trump. But for other more liberal candidate of Republican Party, well, maybe not as easy. But overall, the legacy has been left, and that place has been foregone shifting rightward ever since Donald Trump did something to it. And for the Nebraska 2nd congressional district, I do believe that it is a tilt. Well, the 2nd congressional district of Nebraska is around near the Omaha region, and Omaha itself, like many other cities we have seen today, has an overwhelming Democratic support. But Nebraska as a whole is so red, you can't even find other places. Those places with names like North Palette and Lexington, these places, they don't even have a blue part in it. So a little Omaha is not going to counter Nebraska's 20-point victory status for Republican Party. So Nebraska's 2nd congressional district itself will remain in the Democratic column, but not will the rest part of the state. So let's move into Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. I do believe that where Wisconsin, Michigan goes is where Pennsylvania goes. But this sentence has its reservations. First of all, we must realize that these 3 states I'm referring to, their trends are similar, but their starting points are different. Michigan is one of the most democratic states inside the Rust Belt region alongside with Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So there is a possibility where Wisconsin goes red by around 1 point or 2, but Michigan does not. In fact, if we think about it, Wisconsin has a Republican senator, and that senator is Ron Johnson. and Pennsylvania has a retired Republican Senator Pat Toomey, and Michigan, they almost have one of the Republican senators where Gary Peters barely defeated a Republican nominee. So with Michigan, that 3 senator is basically equivalent. It's just Wisconsin and Pennsylvania senator are enough to flip the seat and win one for the traditionally blue wall state. But Michigan, the starting point is different. So Gary Peters barely hang on to the state senate seat for around 2 to 3 points. So for the sake of the balance, I'm going to give Wisconsin to the Republicans, and I do believe that Pennsylvania is going to Republicans as well. The reason why I make this prediction is because, similar to Ohio, Pennsylvania lose an electoral vote, and I believe that one electoral vote is a Democratic electoral vote. And Michigan, it has 15 votes down from 16. It's going to be all tilt red and even lean Republican in maybe 2028 election if the population continues to decline in these Rust Belt state region. But for the sake of 2024 election, I do still believe that with a similar matchup, Michigan is going to go blue for around half to 1 point. So that's the reason why I'm going to put Michigan as a blue state right here. So that is all of our prediction today. 2071 for Republican nominee and 267 votes for a Democrat. If you do like this video, you can like, share, and subscribe, and you can also comment down below. And I'll see you later. So have a good day. Goodbye.